Okay, continuing on levels of persuasion and evidence. We ended last time looking at the preponderance standard, and I want to build a little bit on this. Like I said, if it's simply more likely than not or more probable than not, then you have a preponderance of evidence in favor, which means what? It means that, look, if it's more probably than not true, then you should commit to it as true. Now, the fact is, and by the way, this is true for anything, that you commit to it as true, but you can still be open for evidence. Someone can give you arguments to the contrary, and then you go below the preponderance of evidence standard, or you can get lots more evidence in favor of it and go up to the clear and convincing or beyond a reasonable doubt and go to these higher levels. Point is, we don't stop thinking when we become a Christian, or for anything else in life. If you decide which career is best for you, it's more probable than not that I'll be happy being a, fill in the blank, a lawyer, a doctor, a producer or something like that. The point is, and you work on that as more likely than not, hence it's true, until I get evidence to the contrary, or I'm even more certain about it. So the fact is, that's how we do decision making with respect to just about everything in life, is, we get evidence, and then when it's more likely than not, we commit to something. So that's the issue with preponderance of the evidence. So now, very important issue here, what about when we're below that 51% standard, the preponderance standard? And here, you get into, in law, especially criminal law, the idea of what's probable cause, what's reasonable suspicion, and again, I'll just read these here, but that's less than certain that the thing occurred. Probable cause in criminal law, probable cause is where known facts and circumstances of a reasonably trustworthy nature are sufficient to justify a man of reasonable caution or prudence in the belief that a crime has been or is being committed. So again, that's a level of certainty required for what? An arrest. You have probable cause, you get an arrest. Now you start translating this stuff into intellectual inquiry kinds of things, okay? Where in preponderance, it's, I should believe it's true and commit, okay? What's probable cause? Well, that should, quote, arrest your attention, okay? You should really stop and think about this really hard because it's really looking like this is true. Even though maybe it's not to the preponderance level yet, the fact is you should stop what you're doing because it looks like it is. Now, below that, okay, which is not enough for an arrest in criminal law, is what's called reasonable suspicion. And in criminal law, that's enough for what's called a temporary stop, even though there's no arrest. A temporary stop, of course, by a police officer is where they can stop you temporarily and try and gather more evidence to get to probable cause to deal with a situation. So reasonable suspicion is exactly what it sounds like. It's a suspicion that's reasonable, okay? It's actually grounded in objective facts that you can articulate and articulate well. And so it would say, for example, common sense conclusions upon which people are entitled to rely, and it requires facts or circumstances that give rise to more than a bare imaginary or purely conjectural suspicion. So this isn't just a hunch, okay? This is the fact you have facts presented to you, and you're saying, a reasonable person, okay, who's using reason would say this, that, I'm using my common sense, it seems like there's something to this. Now, I'll give you an example of reasonable suspicion, okay, in a criminal law context. Let's say that you're a police officer and there's been a number of jewelry store burglaries in a particular area, and you're basically surveilling a particular jewelry store, and at 3 a.m., you see someone dressed in black, and they go and they're looking at the door, they're looking in the window of the jewelry store, and then they're walking around the sides of the building. And now, as a police officer, knowing that there have been burglaries at jewelry stores in the area, you see someone looking in the window of a jewelry store at 3 a.m. dressed in black, and they're walking to the back of the building and going around, and then all of a sudden, you go and you say, hey, buddy, what's going on? As the police officer. And then you come to find out that the person pulls, they say, oh, yeah, hey, officer, yeah, I bought an engagement ring for my fiance from this store, and as I left the store, I think I dropped it or I left it in the store, and I was supposed to present it to her tomorrow morning when I proposed to her. Shows the officer the receipt for it, and he says, oh, okay. The point is that, see, there was no evidence that the person was, quote, conspiring or attempting to burglarize the place. It's the fact is they were looking for a lost engagement ring. So that's an example of a reasonable suspicion, or a suspicion that's reasonable. Say, which is what? That's a stop and think. Okay? You give someone enough evidence that Christianity is true, guess what? You better do a stop and think. Why? Well, here's where we get to the next level here, where what happens when, again, it's below that preponderance level of certainty, and now you want to say, well, what should I do with this? So now I'm going to introduce a concept here that I have found helpful. It's similar to what people know as Pascal's wager. Where it's, and most of you know about Pascal's wager, where, if I'm right and you're wrong, then, it's this benefit and so on and so forth. This is kind of more the legal formula for Pascal's wager, and it's called PGB, probability times the gravity equals the burden. Now, this is a standard that's used in civil negligence or tort cases, where we think about what does it take for a negligence case. So, you see the back of the bus or the ad that says, we'll fight for you, right? Have you been injured in a philosophy accident, right? Negligent infliction of emotional distress, all of that. Well, for a negligence case, you have a duty to make something safe. A breach of that duty, okay? Actual cause for something, okay? That it actually caused damage. Proximate cause, right? It was foreseeable for the damage. And then the last part, there was actually damages. Okay. So when we look at those elements, okay, to prove a negligence case, the first is what? The duty to make something safe. Okay. And then eventually you go, well, okay, you had a duty to make something safe. What was the level of that duty? Well, how much of a duty did you have? So for someone to decide that you breached that duty, you had to establish the level of it. And then you get to what they call the but-for cause. But for, the breach of the duty, would in fact this harm have been caused? So that's actual cause. Proximate cause, was it foreseeable? Then actual damages that actually occur. So here's the point. Back about 80, 90 years ago, the courts came up with a formula, PGB. The probability that the harm would occur, okay, times the gravity if the harm occurred. How weighty would it be? How harmful would it be? Now, based on those two things, we multiply those factors, the likeliness that it would occur versus the greatness of the harm that would occur, and that really defines the level of burden that we put on someone to make something safe, okay? So with that, and I'll give you an example. If you're a pool owner, a house with a pool, and you live in a residential neighborhood, or you're an apartment owner, you have a pool. Kids live in the apartment complex. What does the city and the county and everyone require of you? You have a gate around the pool, a fence around the pool. It stays locked. Why? Because kids like to go in pools. And little kids go and they drown in pools all the time. So what do? Because of the high probability that little kids will want to go in a pool, the gravity, which is ultimately death, what do? They put high burdens on homeowners and apartment and condo owners to make this stuff safe, okay? Same thing with public utility companies. If you're an electric company, you've got some type of transformer or station in a public park. The fact is you got however many watts, 100,000 watts, volts, or whatever in that transformer. Guess what? Little kids play in parks. They hear this thing buzzing and whizzing and sparking. And what do? Hey, that's cool. Let's play with it. Okay. So again, probability that kids in a public park are going to play with something like that, very high. What's the gravity if they get it open and start playing with it? Death. So what's the burden that we put on a public utility company? You fence it up, you lock it up, you make it foolproof, you inspect it all the time, make sure no one is cut through the fencing. See, that's how probability, gravity, and duty works for that. how much or how little. So now, let's turn that into intellectual inquiry, okay? And so what we'll do is I'll introduce the concept in the next segment. I'll follow through with it and give some illustrations. So now instead of duty to make safe, make it the probability that Christianity is true or anything is true times the gravity that it's true. What's the weightiness of it, okay? Equals your intellectual burden or duty to actually find out whether it's true, okay? So because of that, again, just absolutely significant here is that if we actually follow this, and I'll give some examples of this in the next segment, that people actually follow this formula in all areas of life, but because they want to suppress the truth of Christianity, they reject it. So see you in the next segment. Thanks.